Good evening, dear dreamer, to whispers of the night. Tonight, let's wander slowly down a quiet lane where the air is soft with the scent of pine and the fields stretch gently beneath a pale sky. Imagine a small house at the edge of the village, its windows glowing warmly as if inviting the night to pause just for a moment. The world feels still here, wrapped in a gentle hush, where even the wind seems to hum softly through the trees. Let's step lightly toward that house, feeling the earth beneath our feet and the calm of evening settling over us. Somewhere inside, a bright spark wits a little heart full of wonder, curiosity, and stories yet untold. As we move closer, the quiet warmth wraps around us, and the soft glow of lamps casts shadows that sway like whispers. Tonight, we will breathe slowly with the world outside and let ourselves drift into a place where imagination blooms like spring flowers after the rain. Together, we'll discover the gentle magic that waits behind the doors of Green Gables. And if your eyes grow heavy, that's perfectly all right tonight. This lane is ours to wander softly and slowly until sleep comes. Good evening, dear listener, and welcome back to Whispers of the Night. Before our story begins, let's take a gentle moment together to slow everything down. Settle into your resting place now. Let your shoulders drop just a little and allow your jaw to soften. Take a slow breath in through your nose and release it quietly through your mouth. Again, breathing in calm and breathing out the day. Around you, imagine the world growing quieter. The edges of your thoughts soften, like lantern light dimming at dusk. Nothing needs your attention right now. Nothing is waiting. You are safe to rest here. With every breath, feel yourself sinking more comfortably, as though the bed beneath you is gently holding your weight, supporting you without effort. Your arms feel warm and heavy. Your legs loosen, resting easily. Your mind begins to drift like a leaf on still water. If you find comfort in gentle rituals, now is a perfect time to join our quiet circle here at Whispers of the Night. You may choose to subscribe softly and without hurry, so these calm moments can return to you night after night. Think of it as leaving a small lantern lit, ready for you whenever sleep feels far away. Ahead of us waits a peaceful story, filled with open skies, gentle voices, and a place called Green Gables. There is nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to imagine perfectly. Simply let the words carry you. Now, as your breathing settles into its natural rhythm, let the story of Anne of Green Gables begin. Anne of the Green Gables, the girl who arrived with the wind. The afternoon sun draped itself lazily across the rolling fields of Avonlea, touching the tips of tall grasses with a golden warmth that seemed to hum softly against the quiet. of the countryside. At Green Gables, the house rested under a wide sky, its white clapboard walls catching the gentle light and reflecting it in soft, muted gleams. Smoke curled slowly from the chimney, twirling into the pale blue above, like a lazy dancer moving to a rhythm all its own. Every fence post, every flower bed, even the worn path leading to the front gate seemed to hold a gentle, familiar steadiness, unspoken promise of routine, comfort, and the quiet harmony of a life measured in calm days and peaceful nights. Matthew Cuthbert, tall and thin, with a soft-spoken voice that always seemed to hover just above a whisper, sat quietly in his small, well-kept carriage. He had wrapped himself in a thick, warm coat, feeling the chill of the early autumn breeze as it brushed across his cheeks. The air carried hints of hay and earth, mixed with the faint, lingering sweetness of late-blooming flowers. He adjusted his gloved hands on the reins and looked toward the distant station, where he expected to meet the orphan he and his sister, Marilla, had decided to adopt. In his mind, he imagined a boy quiet, practical, sensible, someone who would slip easily into the rhythm of Green Gables without disrupting the soft order of their days. The wheels of the carriage whispered over the worn road, and the trees lining the path bent slightly as if to watch him pass. Matthew's thoughts wandered gently to the stillness of the house, the way Marilla liked everything in its place. The hush of the rooms after supper, the muted creaks of the old wooden floors. There was comfort in predictability, a gentle satisfaction in knowing what each day would hold. And yet, beneath that calm, he felt a small flutter of curiosity. Today would bring a change, small though it might be, and perhaps a hint of adventure to the quiet corridors of Green Gables. When they arrived at the station, the sun had begun its slow descent, painting the sky in ribbons of soft orange and lavender. The platform seemed especially still, almost holding its breath. Matthew's eyes scanned the crowd with quiet anticipation, expecting a boy with a somber expression and neatly combed hair. And then, like a sudden spark lighting the dim platform, he saw her. Anne Shirley was a small, bright burst of energy against the muted backdrop of the station. Her hair, a vivid cascade of red, tumbled in untamed waves over her shoulders, catching the sun and scattering tiny glimmers of copper light. Her eyes were large, wide, and impossibly expressive, green and gold flecked, like the first leaves of fall, filled with a curiosity and excitement that seemed to ripple outward. And from the moment she spoke, her voice, high and lyrical, carried a torrent of words, as though she had been holding them all inside, waiting for the chance to let them spill into the world. "Is this the carriage to Green Gables?" "Oh, I do hope it is," she asked, skipping forward with a lightness that seemed to lift the dust from the platform. "I have traveled so far, and I have seen so many fields, but none so lovely as I imagine the one you spoke of. Do you know? If there are wildflowers, I hope there are wildflowers, for they do make every journey sweeter, and perhaps some apple trees. Oh, I love apple trees. And a brook, if you please, with water that sings over the stones." Matthew's lips twitched. In a small, almost imperceptible smile, he felt a warmth in his chest, the kind that comes from watching someone completely alive with wonder. He opened the carriage door and gestured gently for her to climb in. Anne's small hands gripped the edges of the seat as she settled herself, her eyes still darting around the landscape. as though memorizing every detail. The carriage began its gentle roll down the winding road, the wheels whispering softly over the ruts and stones. Anne did not pause. Words tumbled from her like a bubbling stream, naming every tree, every path, every hint of sunlight, as though they were old friends she had long awaited. Oh, that tree. I think it must be a maple, though I am not certain. The leaves are like little flames dancing in the wind. And look at that fence, just there, where it bends. It seems like it was made for skipping along, don't you think? Matthew listened, quiet and patient, his hands steady on the reins. He noticed the way her eyes shone when she spoke, the little tilt of her head when she imagined stories behind every stone and shadow. It was a kind of music, soft and unpredictable, yet soothing in its rhythm. The countryside blurred past them, but Anne's voice made it vivid in ways he had not expected. He felt as though he were watching the world anew, seeing it through her bright, eager eyes, and the ride seemed almost too short for all the stories she had yet to share. When they turned onto the familiar lane leading to Green Gables, the house came into view, its walls catching the soft glow of the setting sun. But the sight of it, so ordinary and still in Matthew's eyes, seemed to startle Anne. She leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the carriage, and for the first time her words quieted as she drank in the gentle beauty of the place. The fields stretched like a soft green ocean, bordered by wildflowers and the familiar, neatly arranged flower beds of the Cuthberts' home. The windows glowed faintly, promising warmth and the comfort of home, though the calm of the scene seemed almost at odds with the storm of anticipation and excitement that danced in Anne's heart. Marilla Cuthbert met them at the door, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her eyes sharp and assessing. She had expected a boy, a practical child, who would adapt to the rhythms of Green Gables with minimal fuss. Instead, she found herself facing this small, fiery-haired girl, her green eyes sparkling with energy and imagination, her words spilling over in an uncontainable rush. Marilla's breath caught slightly, and she took a careful step back, unsure whether to smile or scold Anne, sensing that perhaps her presence had caused a ripple of confusion, straightened her small shoulders and took a deep breath. She had imagined this day countless times in her mind, and though reality felt a little different, she tried bravely to hold herself with dignity. Her voice softened as she spoke, a gentle tremor beneath the surface. I am Anne Shirley. I hope I may stay. Marilla's eyes softened just a fraction as she regarded the girl before her. Matthew, quiet as ever, stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Anne's shoulder. She'll be staying, he said simply, his voice carrying a calm certainty that seemed to reach even Marilla's cautious heart. Inside Green Gables, the house seemed to pause, adjusting itself to the presence of this small, lively spirit. Anne explored slowly, her fingers brushing over the polished wooden surfaces, her eyes lingering on each familiar object with wonder. She spoke little, sensing that she had said too much on the road, but her mind was alive with stories, names, and possibilities. Even the familiar rooms felt new to her, as if each beam of sunlight through the windows were a secret waiting to be discovered. As twilight deepened, the house settled into its evening rhythm. Matthew retired to the warmth of the sitting room, his quiet smile never leaving his face as he reflected on the day's unexpected turn. Marilla moved with her usual precision, preparing the spare room for Anne, arranging the bed neatly, smoothing the quilt so that it looked inviting and safe. Anne sat quietly on the edge of the bed, taking in the calm, the soft ticking of the clock, the faint creak of the floor beneath her feet. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scents of earth, wood, and the faint tang of early frost. Anne listened, letting the soft murmurs of the evening settle into her mind. She thought of the station, the long journey, and the bright sunlit fields they had passed. She thought of the quiet house, the warm glow of the lamps, and the calm patience of Matthew, and the cautious curiosity of Marilla. And slowly, a gentle hope took root in her heart, fragile but steady, like the first shoots of spring pushing through the soil after a long winter. She lay down on the soft bed, pulling the quilt around her shoulders, and let her thoughts drift like leaves. Outside, the stars began to twinkle faintly, delicate points of light scattered across the darkening sky. The house breathed quietly around her, and Anne felt, for the first time in many days, that perhaps this could be home, not just a house, but a place where she belonged, where her imagination might have space to wander, and where she could slowly learn to grow into the person she hoped to become. And as sleep began to draw near, gentle and inviting, Anne let her eyes close, holding onto the faint, promising glow of the house and the fields beyond. Tomorrow would bring its own discoveries, its own challenges, and its own quiet joys. But for now, in the soft, golden hush of Green Gables, the world felt safe, and hope fluttered like a tiny, unspoken song. Somewhere beyond the edge of the fields, the wind whispered once more, carrying the echoes of a girl's laughter and the faint promise of stories yet to unfold. And as the night settled softly over Green Gables, it felt as if the house itself was breathing with her, ready to welcome her fully into its rhythm, one slow, gentle moment at a time. Anne had arrived with the wind, bright and curious and green. Gables had held its breath to meet her. The quiet house, the patient fields, and the soft glow of evening would soon learn to carry her stories, her laughter, and her small, uncontainable wonder. A home that listened. The morning light at Green Gables slipped quietly across the fields, brushing the tops of the wildflowers with a pale gold that seemed almost shy, as though it too were waking slowly and carefully. The house itself, white and familiar, exhaled a gentle calm into the cool air. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, twisting upward into the soft blue of the sky. The trees surrounding the garden whispered faintly with the morning breeze, their leaves rustling in a tender, unhurried song. Somewhere far off, a bird sang a single note, and it lingered, delicate and fleeting, across the quiet fields. In this soft hush, the house seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the day to unfold gently, as though it had learned to listen before speaking. Anne stirred in the spare room, the morning sun warming her small face as it peeked through the curtains. She blinked slowly, her eyes adjusting to the soft light, and for the first time in many days, she felt a cautious flutter of hope resting somewhere deep in her chest. The room was simple, neat, and quietly welcoming. The bedspread smoothed into gentle folds, a small wooden chair tucked carefully beneath the desk, and a few well-kept shelves holding books that smelled faintly of paper and time. Anne drew a deep breath, letting the sense of wood and morning drift into her awareness, and she noticed how different it felt to be somewhere that seemed to hold space for her. She rose slowly, her bare feet brushing the cool floor, and moved toward the window. Outside, the lane stretched softly into the distance, bordered by flowering hedges and fields that shimmered in the morning light. There was a hush to Avonlea in these early hours, as though the world itself were taking a quiet moment to breathe before the rhythm of daily life began. Anne leaned her forehead against the glass and let her imagination drift, picturing the trees as gentle giants, the flowers as tiny dancers swaying in the wind, and the soft, rolling hills as the gentle rise and fall of the earth's own heartbeat downstairs. The faint clatter of dishes and the low, steady voice of Matthew drifted upward. He moved through the kitchen with the calm assurance that comes from long practice and quiet care. The kettle hissed softly on the stove, steam curling into the warm, gentle air. Matthew hummed under his breath, a low, soothing tune that seemed to fit the rhythm of the house itself. He noticed the subtle glow of sunlight on the table, the way the shadows played across the floorboards, and he felt a quiet contentment in these small details, as though the world were right simply because it existed in harmony with the morning. Anne padded downstairs, each step careful and tentative. She paused at the doorway, taking in the neatness of the kitchen, the faint scent of bread from yesterday's baking, and the way Matthew moved with an ease that seemed almost part of the walls themselves. She offered a small, shy smile, which he returned with a nod that held more warmth than words could capture. Marilla, standing by the stove, turned slightly at the sound of movement. Her posture was still and deliberate, her hands folded lightly over her apron, her eyes sharp yet softened by a faint glimmer of curiosity. She observed Anne carefully, weighing her thoughts with quiet caution. Anne had arrived with such a burst of energy and imagination that Marilla's world of order and routine had wavered just slightly, and now she found herself wondering if perhaps there was space within that order for a spark so bright and unrestrained. Anne began to help with small chores, her hands moving slowly and deliberately as she folded linens, dusted the shelves, and tidied the small corners of the house. She approached each task as though it were part of a larger story, imagining that each folded sheet held the memory of someone's comfort. Each polished surface reflected the quiet dignity of care, and each simple motion mattered in a way that could not be measured. Even washing the dishes became an act of gentle magic, the warm water soothing her hands, the bubbles dancing like tiny clouds, and the sunlight streaming through the window, making the plates and cups gleam softly, as if they too were smiling. Matthew watched quietly, noticing the careful thought in her movements, the way her eyes lingered on the smallest details, and the way she seemed to listen not only to the house but to the life within it. He had not expected such attentiveness, such delicate care, and it touched him deeply, like a soft note in a quiet melody. Marilla, however, remained cautious. She tested Anne gently, asking small questions, observing how she responded to minor mistakes, and watching the way she interacted with the world. When Anne accidentally spilled a little water while filling a pitcher, her face flushed, and she knelt quickly to mop it up. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice soft and earnest. "I didn't mean to make trouble." There was a sincerity in her tone, a trembling honesty that seemed to carry weight beyond the accident itself. Marilla's lips tightened in a small, thoughtful line, and yet she could not help the faint softening of her eyes. The rhythm of Avonlea life began to settle gently around them. Breakfast was quiet but filled with the soft comfort of routine, the clinking of spoons against cups, the muted scrape of knives spreading butter, the low hum of the wind brushing against the windows. Anne moved carefully, pouring tea with deliberate attention, passing plates with a shy grace, and listening to the soft, measured words of Marilla and Matthew. The house itself seemed to breathe in harmony with these movements, its walls and floors carrying the echoes of care and the warmth of a home gradually opening to a new presence. Later, Anne stepped outside for a walk along the familiar lane, the soft earth yielding under her small feet. Wildflowers nodded in the gentle breeze, and the hedgerows were alive with quiet movement, the rustling leaves whispering secrets in a language that only the attentive could hear. She paused often, touching the petals, tracing the patterns of the grass, and imagining stories for every cloud that drifted lazily across the sky. The air was cool and clear, carrying the faint scent of earth, leaves, and distant blooms. Every step felt measured yet free, as though the world were guiding her gently forward, inviting her to explore at her own pace. Marilla followed at a short distance, her expression calm yet alert. She observed Anne's careful movements, the thoughtful pauses, the quiet reverence with which she approached the small wonders of the world. Marilla's own heart, once so fixed on order and duty, felt a subtle shift. She realized that perhaps the presence of this imaginative girl was not a disruption to the household, but a softening, a gentle expansion of the spaces that had long been defined by habit and routine. Evenings at Green Gables carried their own gentle rhythm. The sun dipped slowly below the horizon, spilling warm pinks and purples across the sky, and the house glowed softly in response. Anne helped set the table for supper, her small hands moving with care, and she noticed the quiet pride in Matthew's eyes as he poured water and placed plates with a gentle steadiness. Marilla moved through the kitchen with her usual precision, though now there was a slight softness in her movements, a small willingness to let Anne's voice linger a little longer, a story continue a little further before the day demanded it end. Anne's imagination glowed warmly against the calm backdrop of the house and garden. She found herself inventing stories for the fields, imagining the birds and animals speaking in secret languages and tracing invisible paths in the soft earth. Even the simple act of sweeping the porch became a dance in her mind, a way to weave herself gently into the world that was slowly becoming hers. As the evening settled, Marilla made a quiet, thoughtful decision. Anne would stay. The words were soft, almost unspoken, but they carried a weight of acceptance, a recognition that this bright, lively child had already begun to become part of the quiet rhythm of Green Gables. Matthew, with his gentle smile, did not need to say much. His quiet approval shone in every movement, in every glance, in the calm presence he carried around the house like a steady, invisible lantern. Night deepened, and the house grew still. Anne lay in her small bed, pulling the quilt up around her shoulders, feeling the warmth seep slowly into her bones. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of earth and the faint, lingering sweetness of flowers. The stars began to twinkle faintly in the wide Avonlea sky, each one a tiny, comforting presence. Anne's eyelids grew heavy, but her mind lingered on the small wonders of the day. The way the sun had painted the fields, the careful kindness of Matthew, the subtle softness of Marilla's regard, and the quiet magic that seemed to hum in the very walls of Green Gables. She drifted into a gentle sleep, feeling safe for the first time in years, as if the house itself had leaned in to cradle her. Somewhere beyond the garden and the lane, the soft night stretched outward, inviting her to explore its quiet mysteries in dreams, carrying her gently forward into the days that would follow. And as the moon climbed higher, spilling silver light across the fields and painting long, delicate shadows on the walls, the story seemed to pause in a gentle breath. Anne's world at Green Gables had begun to settle into a tender, welcoming rhythm. Here, in the quiet heart of Avonlea, she would find small joys, careful lessons, and a home that listened, shaping itself slowly around her imagination and her hopes. Tomorrow promised another day of gentle discoveries. Soft walks bordered by wildflowers, quiet mornings filled with the smell of warm bread and tea and the subtle music. School days and kindred spirits. The morning air carried a crispness that hinted at the slow turn of the seasons. Soft light filtered through the trees lining the lane, dappled patterns playing gently across the path where Anne walked, her small shoes tapping lightly on the worn dirt. The sun was still low, painting the fields in pale gold and warm amber, and the scent of earth, fallen leaves, and faint traces of frost drifted in the air. Green Gables lay behind her, quiet and welcoming, as if it had quietly whispered, "Go, but we are here, waiting for your return." Anne's heart fluttered with a mixture of curiosity and cautious excitement. Today was her first day at the Avonlea schoolhouse, and the thought made her chest feel light and wide, as though it had been stretched open to receive all the possibilities the day might bring. The schoolhouse appeared ahead, small and solid, its windows catching the morning sun in bright, warm rectangles that promised comfort and familiarity within. Smoke rose faintly from the chimney, curling in slow, lazy spirals that hinted at the steady warmth of fires already lit inside. The wooden walls, worn smooth by years of careful hands, seemed to hum quietly in anticipation, as though they too were ready to welcome the children who would fill the room with the soft rhythms of learning. The path to the door was lined with low hedges and small wildflowers, still clinging to the edges of autumn, their colors muted but alive in the soft morning light. Anne paused a moment at the doorway, her chest swelling with wonder. The small bell above the door jingled lightly as she pushed it open, and the smell of chalk, warm wood, and paper drifted to meet her. The classroom was already alive with quiet energy the scratching of pencils on paper, the soft murmur of voices, and the low, steady guidance of the teacher moving gently among the students. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, dust motes drifting lazily like tiny golden fairies in the beams. Anne's eyes widened as she took it all in, the neat rows of desks, the well-worn maps on the walls, the shelves lined with books, whose spines seemed to promise secrets and stories waiting for discovery. She slipped to an empty seat near the back, trying to settle quietly, though the faint tremor of anticipation in her chest made her fingers fidget against her skirts. Her red hair, catching the sunlight, shone like fire, and her green-gold eyes reflected the morning light in a way that made her seem both part of the room and entirely apart from it. Anne could feel the curious glances of her classmates, some approving, some uncertain, and her own cheeks warmed slightly. She held her breath, hoping that her eagerness and her imagination would be understood rather than judged. The teacher's voice, calm and measured, drew the room's attention without effort. "Good morning, class," she said, her tone warm and guiding. "Let us begin our day slowly, paying attention to each lesson as it comes." The words had a gentle weight, settling over the students like a soft blanket. Anne listened intently, absorbing not only the lessons, but the rhythm of the space itself. The quiet scratching of pencils, the careful turning of pages, the soft shuffling of feet. She felt, in a quiet corner of her heart, that this was a place that could hold her, just as Green Gables had begun to do. It was during the morning exercises that Anne first noticed Diana Barry. She sat a few desks away, her hair dark and glossy, eyes soft and warm, and a smile that seemed to settle like sunlight over everything near her. Diana's gentle laugh, when it came, was like a little bell chiming in the quiet room, and Anne felt a sudden, inexplicable pull, as though she had known this girl all her life. Their eyes met briefly, and Anne's heart swelled with something she could hardly name. A sense of recognition, of belonging, of finding a missing piece she had not realized she had been searching for. During a break, Anne approached Diana with a shy, careful hopefulness, and their conversation began with the softest of whispers, as if the words themselves were fragile treasures. They shared small secrets, little observations about the classroom and the fields outside, and the air between them seemed to hum with a gentle warmth. Anne found herself laughing, quietly at first, then more freely, and Diana responded with a laugh that made her chest feel light. "You're like a kindred spirit," Anne said softly, almost to herself, and the words seemed to float in the air, delicate and true. Diana's eyes sparkled in response, and Anne knew instantly that the bond between them was beginning, small, quiet, and yet full of promise. Not every moment of school was so easy, of course. Anne's imagination sometimes carried her far from the lesson, her mind dancing across the clouds and the trees outside the window. When she spoke out of turn, or told a story that was too long or too vivid, some classmates frowned, and the occasional ripple of laughter reached her ears. Her cheeks flushed, a mixture of embarrassment and pride, but she tried to meet each moment with sincerity, apologizing with an earnestness that seemed to calm the tiny storms she sometimes stirred. Even Marilla's careful lessons in patience could not have prepared her for the quiet negotiation of social understanding. Yet Anne's heart remained gentle and her intentions clear. The days passed slowly in the comforting rhythm of school. Lessons moved from reading to arithmetic to history, each guided by the teacher's steady voice, and noticed the way the sun shifted through the windows, casting long golden beams across the desks, highlighting the dust that drifted lazily in the warm light. She found joy in the smallest observations, the crispness of a new page, the smooth glide of pencil over paper, the soft scent of chalk mingling with the earthy perfume of the classroom. Even the ordinary tasks, when seen through her imagination, became part of a tapestry of wonder, connecting her to the room, to her peers, and to the larger world of Avonlea beyond. Diana and Anne walked home together in the afternoons, their steps light on the soft, winding lanes. The fields flanked the road with gentle color, the trees swaying softly in the breeze, their leaves turning golden, amber, and copper with the slow approach of autumn. The air was tinged with the warmth of sun and the faint, musky scent of earth and fallen leaves. Anne and Diana shared whispered stories, promises of future adventures, and the quiet confidence that comes from finding a kindred spirit in the world. Their laughter mingled with the rustling of the trees and the soft chirping of birds settling in for the evening, carrying the sound gently across the fields. Evenings at Green Gables were quiet and calm, but they now carried an added layer of warmth. Anne would describe her day to Matthew, who listened with a quiet smile, absorbing every word as though it were a gift. Marilla, while still reserved, allowed herself small, soft smiles and occasional words of encouragement, her careful attention no longer tinged with worry, but with a growing recognition of Anne's steady sincerity and boundless imagination. The house seemed to exhale around them, its walls holding the echoes of laughter, the soft rustle of skirts, and the gentle rhythm of a life becoming fuller and more complete. Anne's mind continued to spin delicate stories even after the school day had ended. She imagined the fields as enchanted, the trees whispering secrets in the wind, and the small animals of Avonlea moving with silent purpose in the underbrush. Every sight and sound carried a quiet poetry, a soft magic that filled her senses and made the ordinary extraordinary. She noticed the sun painting the clouds in delicate pastels, the faint scent of earth and wood smoke in the air, and the gentle sway of flowers nodding in the breeze as though acknowledging her presence. Each moment felt significant, yet peaceful, as though the world had slowed its pace to match her own heartbeat at night. Anne would lie in her bed at Green Gables, feeling the warmth of the quilt around her shoulders and the soft hush of the house settling into rest. The wind outside whispered through the trees, carrying faint, distant sounds of the village at twilight, and the stars began to twinkle softly, like tiny points of reassurance in the wide, dark sky. Anne's heart felt full, touched by the quiet magic of friendship and the comfort of a home that had begun to accept her fully. She held onto the gentle certainty that tomorrow would bring more laughter, more whispered secrets, more discoveries along the soft, winding lanes of Avonlea. And as sleep descended, slow and tender, and imagined her days at school unfolding like petals opening beneath the sun, she pictured her friendship with Diana growing, the quiet rhythms of the classroom becoming familiar and safe, and the small, steady steps of learning how to be seen, heard, and understood. Every sound, every sight, every soft touch of the breeze through the fields carried a lesson in patience, kindness, and belonging. In the quiet, Anne's imagination settled into harmony with the world around her, and she felt, perhaps for the first time, the deep comfort of knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be. As night wrapped itself gently over Green Gables, the lane glimmered faintly in the silver glow of the moon, the trees swaying softly as though whispering a lullaby for the two girls who had discovered each other's hearts that day. Tomorrow would bring more lessons, more laughter, more stories shared beneath the open sky, but for now, Anne drifted quietly into sleep, her mind full of wonder and warmth, ready to carry the gentle magic of Avonlea into dreams. The world outside held its breath in tender stillness, the soft hum of night brushing over the fields and through the trees. Seasons of learning. The world outside Green Gables moved slowly, almost as if it were breathing with the seasons. Autumn's golden leaves had drifted to the ground, creating a soft carpet along the lane, and the wind whispered through the trees with a gentle, lingering chill. As the weeks passed, frost began to lace the edges of the fields, sparkling faintly in the morning sun, and the quiet hush of winter settled over Avonlea like a soft blanket. Snow fell in gentle, floating flakes, covering the hedges, rooftops, and fields in a pristine, sparkling silence. Each flake seemed to pause in the air, turning the world into a dreamscape where every sound was softened, every movement measured, and every detail seemed important simply because it existed. Anne loved these quiet mornings when the world felt hushed and expectant. She would step carefully onto the snow-covered lane, her boots leaving small, neat impressions behind her, and listen to the soft crunch beneath her feet. The air smelled faintly of pine and frost, carrying a sweetness that mingled with the warm, lingering scent of the fire inside Green Gables. Even the bare trees seemed alive to her imagination, their branches reaching upward like delicate fingers, holding the sky and the snow together in a quiet, tender balance. She would pause sometimes to gaze at the patterns in the frost, imagining shapes and stories that danced in the white sparkle. And she found that her heart felt wide and open, eager to greet whatever small wonders the day might bring. Inside, Green Gables was warm and welcoming, the soft glow of the fire spilling across the wooden floors. Matthew sat in his favorite chair by the hearth, his hands folded gently on his lap, watching the flames flicker and bend with a soft, measured rhythm. His face, always calm and quiet, carried a slight, contented smile as he listened to Anne describe her morning explorations. Even the simplest observations, robin perched on a fence, a rabbit's tracks in the snow became stories in her mind, and she shared them with a delicate enthusiasm that filled the room with warmth. Marilla moved around the kitchen with her usual precise motions, though now her movements carried a subtle softness. She set out cups of steaming tea, folded freshly laundered clothes, and smoothed the tablecloth with steady, deliberate care. Anne watched her for a moment, noticing how small acts of thoughtfulness could hold more meaning than grand gestures. Matthew's quiet presence and Marilla's consistent, steady care taught her that love and attention did not always arrive in dramatic ways. Sometimes it lived in the gentle rhythm of everyday life, the way the kettle whistled softly, the way the chair was pulled out for her without a word, or the way a warm hand rested briefly on a shoulder before returning to its work. Anne's heart understood these lessons in a quiet, unhurried way, and she treasured each small, careful gesture as a secret treasure. School became a place of discovery in its own slow, steady rhythm. The winter months brought their own quiet challenges, long lessons in reading and arithmetic, careful writing exercises, and occasional friendly rivalries that tested both patience and humility. Anne strove not to impress others, but because she genuinely delighted in learning. Each mistake she made, misspelling a word, misunderstanding a sum, or forgetting a line from a poem, was met with sincere reflection and careful apology. She discovered that growth did not need to arrive in sudden bursts. It could unfold quietly, patiently, and with gentle persistence. Her classmates noticed her determination, and though small conflicts sometimes arose, the tension never felt sharp or frightening. Instead, each moment of challenge seemed like a soft ripple in the calm waters of the classroom. Soon smoothed by time and understanding, Anne's imagination remained vivid even in the structured environment of school. During lessons, her mind often wandered to the fields and forests of Avonlea, to the small animals and rustling trees outside the window, and to the quiet magic that she imagined lingered in every corner of the world. She drew patterns in the margins of her notebooks, imagined conversations between clouds, and pictured stories for every bird that flitted past the frosted windows. Though these flights of fancy sometimes drew gentle admonishments from the teacher, Anne learned to balance her imagination with the focus required for study, and in doing so, discovered a quiet satisfaction in learning how to navigate both worlds. Evenings at Green Gables were filled with soft routines and tender rhythms, and would help with small tasks around the house, setting the table, arranging the firewood, or brushing the hearth clean. Matthew would listen to her, recount her day, his quiet attentiveness creating a space where her thoughts and dreams could flow freely without interruption. Marilla, still reserved, showed her care through consistent axe-folding laundry with careful precision, preparing a warm meal, or simply placing a cup of cocoa within reach. Anne began to understand that love was often not a grand performance, but a gentle constancy, a rhythm that could be felt in the careful gestures and quiet attentiveness of those who truly cared. Spring arrived with a delicate, almost imperceptible, unfolding of color. The snow melted slowly, revealing the soft green tips of grass beneath the first wildflowers pushing through the earth, and the gentle shimmer of dew on every leaf and blade. Birds returned, their songs filling the air with bright, lilting notes that carried across the fields and gardens. The lane to Green Gables became dotted with blossoms, and Anne delighted in the subtle changes, naming each flower, imagining its story, and carrying the colors in her heart as she walked to school. The world felt alive, but in a soft, measured way, teaching her that change could be gentle, that growth could arrive quietly, and that wonder did not need to rush. Anne's friendships deepened alongside the changing seasons. Diana Barry remained a constant presence, her laughter and warmth a steady companion on walks to and from school, and during afternoons spent exploring the woods, streams, and fields. Together, they created whispered stories, secret pathways, and imagined adventures. Anne's eyes shone with the light of recognition and connection, and in Diana, she discovered a reflection of her own heart, kindred spirit, who seemed to understand the rhythm of her mind, the expansiveness of her imagination, and the tender hope that fluttered quietly in her chest. Even small mistakes became lessons in patience and humility. When Anne spilled ink over a page in her notebook or lost her place during a reading aloud, she met the situation with quiet apology and reflective thought. She learned to carry her mistakes lightly, to accept correction without fear, and to understand that every misstep was part of a slow, natural unfolding of her growth. Avonlea itself seemed to mirror this rhythm. The fields, the trees, and the softly flowing brooks all reminded her that life moves gently, that change is gradual, and that beauty often emerges quietly over time. Anne began to notice the subtleties of human connection as well. She watched the way Marilla's expressions softened when she was unaware, the quiet attentiveness in Matthew's eyes, and the gentle patience of her classmates when she stumbled in her eagerness to share ideas. The world of Avonlea was filled with a careful attentiveness, a community of subtle care and observation, and Anne felt herself settling into it with a growing sense of belonging. She realized that to be part of this world was to listen, to observe, and to carry oneself with awareness, all while keeping her imagination alive and unbroken. Long walks through the fields and woods became part of her daily life. Anne moved with a sense of purpose that was not hurried, her eyes drinking in the colors, textures, and patterns of the changing seasons. The sun casts long, soft shadows over the fields in late afternoon, painting the earth with a warm glow. She imagined stories in the bending of each branch, the shimmer of a stream, and the gentle sway of flowers nodding in the breeze. Each step along the familiar paths became a meditation, a slow unfolding of understanding and comfort. Evenings brought reflection. Anne would stand by a window at Green Gables, watching the sky shift from amber to deep purple as the sun set the horizon, lined with trees glowing faintly in the last light. She thought of her learning, her friends, and the quiet warmth of the house around her. Growth, she realized, did not always come with loud announcements or dramatic changes. It arrived softly, in measured steps, in quiet understanding, in the slow accumulation of knowledge, skill, and emotional awareness. It lived in the rhythm of everyday life and in the steady care of those who held her heart. Matthew's presence remained a quiet anchor. In the glow of the fire, he would listen as Anne described the day's discoveries, asking gentle questions and offering a steadying calm that balanced the exuberance of her imagination. Marilla, though reserved, continued to show her care through consistency, preparing warm meals, smoothing the beds, and allowing Anne's thoughts to flow freely in conversation without interruption. These subtle acts, repeated day after day, became the foundation of a life filled with warmth, security, and quiet understanding. As summer approached, the fields were awash in green, the hedgerows dotted with wildflowers, and the air was fragrant with the faint sweetness of new growth. Anne's mind continued to bloom alongside the season, her imagination finding fresh ways to interpret the world around her. her heart learning the steady rhythm of effort and patience, and her spirit growing in quiet confidence. She discovered that growing up did not mean losing wonder, but learning how to carry it gently, how to balance imagination with reality, and how to find beauty in both small details and the grand sweep of life. On one particularly soft evening, Anne walked along the familiar lane with the sun low in the sky, casting the fields in a golden-orange glow that seemed almost tangible. She breathed deeply, savoring the warmth of the light, the faint scent of earth and flowers, and the gentle hum of life all around her. It was a moment of reflective comfort, a pause in which she could feel herself connected to everything: the house that sheltered her, the friends who understood her, the teachers who guided her, and the seasons that unfolded slowly and patiently. She felt, in the quiet of that late afternoon, that life itself moved at its own gentle pace, carrying lessons, growth, and joy without hurry, without rush. As night approached, the sky deepened into shades of violet and indigo, and the first stars began to shimmer faintly above the fields of Avonlea. Anne returned to Green Gables, carrying with her the quiet contentment of the day and the gentle lessons it had offered. She settled into bed, drawing the quilt around her shoulders, listening to the faint rustle of leaves outside, and feeling the soft, steady heartbeat of the house. The wind whispered through the trees, the fire in the hearth hummed its low, steady song, and the stars twinkled quietly above, each one a tiny reassurance in the vast, calm night. Anne's thoughts drifted over the small triumphs and lessons of the day, the friendships nurtured, and the subtle growth that came with each passing season. She understood, more fully than ever, that life's greatest treasures often unfolded quietly, with patience, kindness, and attention to the gentle rhythms of the world around her. And as sleep drew near, Anne gazed once more across the fields, the horizon glowing softly with the last light of the sun. She felt a tender curiosity for what lay ahead, a readiness to meet the unfolding seasons with imagination, patience, and quiet courage. Life, she realized, was a slow, beautiful story, and she was learning to carry its wonder gently, without haste. With her heart open and steady, the stars above shimmered softly, and the wind whispered through the hedgerows, carrying the promise of tomorrow, of new lessons, of continued growth, and of all the quiet joys that awaited beyond the familiar paths. Anne closed her eyes, the warmth of Green Gables embracing her gently, and drifted into sleep, ready to greet the next day with a heart both full of wonder and steady with understanding. Holding on, letting grow. The days grew longer and softer as summer ripened toward its gentle end, carrying the warmth of sunlight that lingered late into the evenings. Green Gables seemed to breathe with the slow rhythm of the season, the air humming faintly with the songs of birds and the steady murmur of leaves moving in the breeze. Anne walked along the familiar lanes more deliberately now, her red hair catching the golden light in soft glimmers, her green eyes reflecting the sky's calm expanses above. Each step she took felt measured, quiet, as if she were learning to move in harmony with the world rather than merely within it. She carried her thoughts gently, aware that the comfort of Green Gables had slowly become both her anchor and her springboard, a home that cradled her imagination yet asked for her care in return. Inside, the house held its usual warmth. Matthew sat in his chair by the hearth, his frame a little more bent, his movements a touch slower than in previous years. Anne noticed the way he leaned back slightly, a faint sigh escaping his lips as he smoothed the quilt over his knees. She moved quietly around him, her steps soft on the wooden floor, her hands busy with small, careful chores, carrying wood to the fire, setting the table, tending to the garden. These acts of service were gentle, deliberate, and full of intention. Anne felt a tender satisfaction in being needed, in offering the quiet support that kept the house humming. In its gentle, comforting rhythm, Marilla, too, moved with a thoughtful precision, though there was a slight weight in her expression, a pause in her steps that Anne had begun to notice. When she folded laundry or arranged the table, she lingered a moment longer over each task, her mind perhaps tracing the slow passage of time, the changes both seen and unseen in the lives of those she loved. Anne watched quietly, learning to read the subtle rhythms of their lives, understanding that love often resided not in spoken words or grand gestures, but in steady attention, in the patience to notice small signs of need and respond with gentle care. Anne's imagination, once a vivid torrent of stories and daydreams, had begun to flow with a softer, more measured grace. She still found delight in the patterns of clouds, the swaying of flowers, and the gentle curves of the fields. Yet her thoughts were tempered now with a budding wisdom. She learned when to speak, letting words carry weight without crowding the quiet spaces of conversation, and when to simply be present, observing and listening. In this, she discovered a deeper rhythm of belonging, a sense that to be part of Green Gables was to give, to watch, and to honor the quiet moments that make a home whole. School had become a familiar, steady pattern, yet the challenges and faced now were subtly different. Her lessons extended beyond reading, arithmetic, and history, stretching into realms of responsibility, reflection, and self-discipline. She noticed how friendships could shift gently with time, how Diana might linger on one thought while she pursued another, how small misunderstandings could arise not from malice, but from the natural unfolding of lives growing and stretching in different directions. Anne discovered that closeness was not lost when paths diverged. It was sustained by intention, by care, and by the quiet recognition of the bonds that had already taken root. Even the simple act of walking along the lanes of Avonlea carried a reflective weight now. The fields, once only a playground for her, imagination revealed subtler lessons. The patience of a tree that grows slowly through the seasons, the resilience of flowers that bloom quietly despite frost, the steadfastness of the brook that winds tirelessly through the landscape. Each step became a meditation, each breath an opportunity to feel gratitude for the ordinary yet profound rhythms of life. She learned that time, like the lanes she walked so often, could guide without rushing, teaching without harshness, and shaping her heart in quiet, gentle ways. Anne's evenings were often spent by the fire, sharing her thoughts and observations with Matthew. He listened with a soft attentiveness that required no words, no judgments, simply the quiet presence of someone who cared deeply. His steady gaze, calm and unhurried, became a source of comfort, a gentle counterpoint to the whirling currents of Anne's imagination. Marilla, though quieter in her expressions, offered subtle acknowledgement of Anne's growth and approving glance, a small nod, the careful placement of a teacup within reach. These small gestures spoke volumes, teaching Anne that love's quiet persistence could carry as much weight as the loudest declarations. Autumn arrived gradually, painting the fields and forests in muted tones of amber, copper, and gold. The hedgerows along the lane were sprinkled with crimson berries, and the air carried the faint musk of fallen leaves, mingled with the lingering warmth of sun-soaked soil. Anne delighted in these changes, walking slowly, her eyes catching every subtle shift in color, every delicate curve of a branch, every glimmer of dew clinging to a leaf. She imagined stories in each detail, yet her narratives were infused with a calm understanding. The world unfolded patiently, and she could too, carrying wonder without haste, grace without urgency. The rhythm of Green Gables continued to teach her lessons of quiet responsibility. She began to anticipate the needs of the household, noticing when Matthew's hands trembled slightly as he carried a basket of kindling, or when Marilla paused mid-task, her eyes lingering on a distant corner of the room as though tracing invisible lines of thought. Anne responded with gentle care, offering small assistance without fanfares, smoothing the quilt, filling the kettle, gathering herbs from the garden. These acts were simple, quiet, yet profoundly meaningful, and in them, Anne learned the gentle art of holding on to the people she loved, holding on to the rhythms of life, and holding on to the small, steady joys that form the backbone of a home. Her friendships, too, continued to grow with measured depth. Diana remained a constant presence, yet their conversations now carried a hint of reflection, a recognition that the passage of time introduced subtle changes. They shared memories of summer afternoons, laughter under open skies, and the quiet understanding that some bonds do not fade but deepen when nurtured with care. Anne realized that closeness was not measured by constant proximity, but by the steadiness of hearts aligned in gentle understanding. Even as their paths began to diverge in small ways, chores, school responsibilities, and personal interests, Anne felt secure in the knowledge that true connection persists beyond distance. Anne's imagination continued to flourish, but it had acquired a new maturity. She found joy not only in flights of fancy, but also in discerning how those flights could serve kindness, understanding, and reflection. When she daydreamed by the brook, she imagined stories that brought warmth to others' hearts. When she noticed a struggling bird or a wilting flower, her imagination guided her toward care rather than mere observation. She learned that wonder could be tempered with wisdom, and that the richest stories are those that intertwine joy with insight. Matthew's quiet guidance remained a cornerstone in her life. He never imposed his thoughts, but allowed Anne to explore, to stumble, and to reflect, offering only the softest hints of direction when needed. Marilla's care, expressed through steadfast acts rather than words, complemented Matthew's presence, creating a gentle balance that framed Anne's growth in security, warmth, and subtle insight. Together, their influence taught her that love is most profound, not in flamboyant displays, but in quiet consistency and measured attention. Evenings were spent with deliberate reflection. Anne would walk the lane under the soft glow of the setting sun, the sky spreading wide and calm. Above her, the amber light casts long, tender shadows across the fields, painting everything with a delicate patience that seemed to slow time itself. The wind whispered faintly through the hedgerows, carrying the scent of late-blooming flowers and the earthy aroma of soil turned rich by summer rains. Anne breathed deeply, feeling gratitude settle softly in her chest. Life was changing, as it always does, yet the most precious elements, love, friendship, wonder, remained steady, luminous in their quiet constancy. Sometimes she paused at the crest of a hill, gazing across the familiar fields that now felt more like companions than mere scenery. The brook shimmered faintly in the last light of day, bending gently around the curves of the land. Trees swayed softly in the evening breeze, their leaves murmuring secrets that only those willing to listen could hear. Anne felt the delicate pull of growth in her own life, the stretch of dreams beyond the boundaries of Green Gables, the subtle maturity creeping into her imagination, the wisdom forming in her heart. And yet, beneath it all, she sensed the grounding of home, the tether of love that would always hold her steady. Anne learned that responsibility and freedom could coexist. She carried her duties at Green Gables with care, yet allowed her mind to wander with imagination, her heart to reach for dreams, her spirit to stretch into possibility. She understood that growth does not require rushing, that maturity need not diminish wonder, and that life's most meaningful lessons are often those learned quietly in gentle moments of observation, empathy, and reflection. As twilight deepened, Anne returned to the warmth of the house. She helped set the table for the evening meal, the soft clatter of dishes mingling with the faint crackle of the fire. Matthew, with a calm smile, attended to his usual tasks, while Marilla moved with deliberate care, folding napkins, arranging chairs, and preparing food with steady hands. Anne felt the rhythm of the household as a living thing, a heartbeat that resonated in the spaces between their movements, steady and warm, carrying lessons in love, attention, and patience. Night wrapped the fields in a quiet veil, the moon rising slowly to cast silver light over the hedgerows and lanes. Anne stood by her bedroom window for a moment, the cool night air brushing against her cheeks, carrying the faint scent of earth and lingering flowers. She gazed across the familiar landscape, her heart swelling with gratitude for all that had been given, for all that had been learned, and for the gentle certainty that some treasures, love, home, friendship, imagination, would remain no matter how far life's path might stretch. Her eyelids grew heavy, and she lay down beneath the quilt, feeling its warmth settle around her like a soft embrace. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, the brook murmured faintly in the distance, and the stars twinkled quietly, each one a tiny reminder that even as life changes, some light remains constant. Anne's heart, full of reflection, love, and quiet understanding, rested in the gentle rhythm of the house, the community, and the seasons themselves. And as sleep drew her into its tender, soothing embrace, Anne felt the delicate balance of holding on and letting grow. The world outside was vast and ever-changing, but here, in the calm of Green Gables, she had found her place. Her imagination, her heart, and her sense of responsibility intertwined into a quiet harmony, preparing her for whatever the days ahead might bring. The story of her growth was measured, gentle, and steady, a candle burning low, yet warm, illuminating the path of understanding, care, and quiet joy that awaited her with each sunrise. Tomorrow, as always, would bring new discoveries, small moments of learning, and the soft expansion of dreams. Yet tonight, Anne allowed herself the full embrace of peace, gratitude, and the calm knowledge that life, in its quiet rhythm, was teaching her the most tender and enduring lessons. Green Gables always The house at Green Gables stood quietly beneath a wide, open sky, its familiar roofline softened by the gentle light of evening. Time had passed here not in sharp edges or sudden turns, but in layers like the rings inside a tree, each one holding a season of memory. Anne stood near the front steps, her hands resting lightly at her sides, feeling the calm weight of all that had been lived within these walls. The air carried the soft scent of grass, cooling after a warm day, and the trees along the lane whispered in a language she had learned slowly, patiently, over many years. She was no longer the small, uncertain girl who had once arrived with a heart full of hope and fear tangled together. Yet that child still lived within her, quieter now, steadier, shaped by kindness and belonging. Anne felt this clearly as she looked out across the fields, where the light of sunset settled gently, painting the land in muted golds and dusky blues. Each field, each fence post, each winding path seemed to recognize her, as if Avonlea itself had been watching her grow. Inside the house, Marilla moved with her usual measured pace, setting a lamp upon the table and adjusting its wick until the glow was just right. Anne watched her for a moment, noticing the familiar set of her shoulders, the calm precision of her hands. There was comfort in these small rituals, in the predictability that had once seemed so rigid but now felt deeply reassuring. Marilla did not speak much, but her presence filled the room with a quiet strength that needed no explanation. Anne stepped inside, the floorboards welcoming her with their gentle creak. She paused near the doorway, taking in the room as though seeing it through a lens polished by memory. The worn edges of the table, the smooth arm of Matthew's old chair, the faint pattern of shadows cast by the lamp hall of it. The house had listened through laughter and silence alike, holding every moment without judgment. Marilla glanced up, her eyes meeting Anne's with a look that carried years of understanding. No words were needed. There was a shared awareness between them now, an easy rhythm that had grown slowly through time and patience. Anne felt a warmth rise in her chest, not sudden or overwhelming, but steady and grounding. Love, she had learned, often lived in these quiet exchanges, in the way someone looked at you across a room, or in the way they remembered to light a lamp just before dusk. Matthew's presence lingered gently in the spaces between things. Though his chair sat empty, it did not feel lonely. Anne could almost hear the soft sound of his breathing, imagine his kind eyes watching with quiet pride. He had shaped her, not through instruction, but through listening, through allowing her to be fully herself. His influence remained woven into the fabric of Green Gables, as enduring as the beams that held the house upright. Anne moved toward the window, her fingers brushing the sill, worn smooth by time. Outside, the trees stood tall and patient, their branches swaying slightly in the evening breeze. She remembered walking beneath them as a child, naming them, imagining them as guardians and friends. Now, they seemed less like characters in a story and more like companions who had simply always been there, growing alongside her. The road beyond the lane curved gently out of sight, just as it always had. Once, it had symbolized endless possibility, a ribbon leading to unknown adventures. Now, Anne saw it differently, not as a call to leave, but as a reminder that the world was wide, even when one chose to stay. She understood that her dreams did not diminish because her roots were strong. In fact, they seemed clearer, steadier, supported by all that Green Gables had given her. Marilla joined her near the window, standing close without crowding the space. Together, they looked out at the fading light, watching as the first stars appeared, faint but steady. There was a shared stillness between them, a comfort born of years spent side by side. Anne felt gratitude settle quietly within her, deep and unhurried. "I'm glad you're here," Marilla said at last, her voice calm, almost casual, yet carrying more meaning than she might have intended. Anne smiled softly. "So am I." The words felt complete, needing no further explanation. They held everything: choice, devotion, and a peaceful certainty that did not demand justification. As evening deepened, the house grew warmer with lamplight. The shadows softened, stretching lazily across the walls, and the sounds of the outside world faded into a gentle hush. Anne helped set the table, her movements practiced and unforced. Each task felt like a continuation of something long begun, not an obligation, but a rhythm she knew by heart. Later, when the dishes were done and the night had fully settled, Anne stepped outside once more. The sky above Green Gables was vast and clear, scattered with stars that shimmered quietly. She breathed in the cool air, feeling the steady beat of her own heart, aligned with the calm of the world around her. This place had shaped her imagination, her resilience, her capacity for love. And in return, she had given it her presence, her care, her growing wisdom. Anne thought of the journey that had brought her here, the loneliness of her early days, the tentative hope of belonging, the gradual unfolding of trust and affection. None of it felt distant or heavy now. It rested gently within her, like a story she could revisit without pain. Green Gables had been the setting, the listener, the steady witness to her becoming. She looked once more at the house, its windows glowing warmly against the dark. There was no sense of ending, no need for finality. Life would continue to unfold, as it always did, with small changes and quiet joys. But this sense of belonging, this peace felt enduring. Anne turned back toward the door, carrying the night's calm with her. As she stepped inside, the warmth of the house embraced her, familiar and sure. Somewhere in the distance, the wind moved through the trees, and the stars kept their silent watch. And so the story settled, like a lullaby sung softly at the close of day. Green Gables remained, holding memory and promise together, a place that would always live within Anne and perhaps within anyone who had ever longed for a home that listens. With that gentle thought, the night deepened, the lamps glowed steadily, and rest arrived as quietly as Anne once had on a road lined with trees, memory, and endless possibility. And so the night grows still. The story rests beside you like a quiet friend. Let your thoughts fade gently into sleep. Green Gables will be here whenever you return. Good night from Whispers of the Night.